What's going on, Dolphins fans? It is your boy Dillon, and I am here with you today to make my Indianapolis Colts versus Miami Dolphins preview video. If you guys hadn't noticed, the way I say the teams, the order that I say the teams in is so that way you guys can identify just, based off of how I say it and then how it is in the title, whether, who's the home team and who's the away team. So the team that I start with is always going to be the home team. So this game is the Indianapolis Colts versus the Miami Dolphins. And, I phrase it that way, versus the first team, home team versus their opponent, right? So, like I said, so this is against the Colts. It is going to be in Indianapolis. And look, the Colts are definitely a better team than the Jets were, than the Washington Redskins. And so look, at the end of the day, from here on out, for the second half of the season, I'm probably not going to, be too big into specific score predictions and shit like that, because one, it's super hard and you almost never get it right. And two, mostly just because at the end of the day, that really doesn't matter, right? So I want to see, because here's the thing, right? So we started off the season. Well, first of all, not everybody, but a lot of people have been hyping up and talking up the fact that the Dolphins have played so much better in the past 4 games than they did in the first 4 games. And then they'll say things like, we were, in the past 4 games, our defense is 9th overall in passing yards. And they'll leave out the fact that we're still 30th, I believe it's 30th. Oh, no, wait. We are 20th. We moved up to 20th overall. Is that right? Hang on a second. Yeah, so we did move up to 20th overall, right? But, across the board, points allowed, we're still 32nd, blah, 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 blah. So, but it's full context. And have we done better over the past 4 games? Yes, absolutely, right? We've been losing by less overall, blah, blah, blah. But we still have a ton of injuries and stuff like that. And look, our defense is obviously without Xavier Howard. Rashad Jones is not going to be in this game. I'll get to the injuries in a minute, though. We obviously know Preston Williams is going to be out. Because for the rest of the season, because he's got an ACL injury. Mark Walton is suspended for the next 4 games. And Ryan Fitzpatrick popped up on the injury report this week with a shoulder injury. So, there's a lot of reasons to say that we also could, regress a little bit. Plus, the big thing, and one of the most important things about the first 4 games and the second 4 games is that, again, we played the Baltimore Ravens, the New England Patriots, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Los Angeles Chargers in the first 4 games. All very good teams, all playoff teams from last year, all teams that expect to either go to or fight for the playoffs this year. One of those is the defending Super Bowl champions. And look at the quarterbacks: Lamar Jackson, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, and Phillip Rivers. The previous 4 games, we played the lowly Washington Redskins, the alright Buffalo Bills, but we did end up losing 31-21. The Pittsburgh Steelers that are on the rise for sure. But at least at the time we're not very good, super banged up. They lost a lot of talent, so on and so forth, and they just got Mason Rudolph back. And then the New York Jets, who obviously are not a good team and who have a lot of problems, so on and so forth, a bad offensive line, internal problems within the organization, so on and so forth. So we have to keep that in full context. Now, am I happy that there has been overall progress? Yes, but that's just on its mostly on its face, right? So when you put everything in full context, there's still a lot to overcome and a lot of progress to be made. Now let's real quick look at the back end of the schedule. So the last 8 games. Now there are some definitely winnable games. There are definitely some games where we could perform well. We'll have to see how things go for the rest of the season and how injuries continue to play out. I mean, we're massively injured and we're only halfway through the season. So, and now Ryan Fitzpatrick has a shoulder injury. What if we lose him at some point, right? So there's still a lot and there's still overwhelming evidence that the coaching staff has thrown games and has attempted to throw the last one. But let's look at the back half of the game. So this back half of the season. So this upcoming game we play against the Indianapolis Colts in Indy. It's a pretty good team. They are currently 5-3 overall. They will be without Jacoby Brissett, so we are going to see Brian Hoyer, but he's a savvy veteran, at least in the same way as Ryan Fitzpatrick is. I would say Brian Hoyer is probably a bit better overall than Ryan Fitzpatrick. But whatever, it doesn't really matter. You could argue that it doesn't really matter. They're similar, quarterbacks in the sense that, they've never really been the number one guy. They're both on, have played on lots of different teams and so on and so forth, right? So they're both really just decent backups. That's the quality of quarterback they are. Anyway, but Brian Hoyer should be far less injured than Ryan Fitzpatrick is. And so we'll see. But then we play the Buffalo Bills. That is a home game for us. Although it is the Buffalo Bills. They are a good team. Then we play the Cleveland Browns. Not a good team, right? But they do have a ton of talent. But that is going to be in Cleveland. So that's going to be in their house, right? So like Indy, right? What we're going to be looking for in this game is how well do we play against the level of competition? And do we end up winning or not, right? Because a loss is still a loss at the end of the day. And then what is the level of play? What is the quality of production of play? Do we end up regressing and score less points, right? Because we scored 26 points in this past game, more than we've scored in any other game ever in this season, right? To this point. So, do we regress? Do we only score like 14 again? Or do we end up getting less than 10 against a better defense in their home stadium? And then do we end up letting up over 30 points again, right? As we have for the majority of the season, or at least for to this point, a good amount of the season to this game. 5 of our 8 games we've let up over 30 points. So, right? And then same thing against the Bills, right? How do we play against them? And then, but then same thing, right? So the theme for the rest of the season is wins and losses. Do we end up getting any more wins at all? And also, how do we actually play against the quality of opponent, right? So we have 2 good teams coming up in the Colts and the Bills. Then we have a bad team against the Browns. But then we play against the Philadelphia Eagles, which are, I think they're like 1 game above 500 or something like that. They're right around 500. So they're about an average team as it stands at the midway point of the season. That's going to be a home game for us, though. Then we go and play the bad New York Jets again, right? Because we still have 1 more game against them, but that's going to be in New York. Do we beat them, right? Because that's a very winnable game against a bad team that's reeling in a lot of ways, both internally in the organization, blah, 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 with injuries and so on and so forth. But that's in New York. Do they come back, do they get revenge and do they win that game? Because that is a bad team. So if we end up losing that game, that says a lot, right? And then obviously we didn't perform well. The New York Giants, they're not a very good team either. We play them after the Jets, but that's also in New York. So those are going to be 2 straight away games. Then we come back home for our Cincinnati Bengals game. How well do we play against them? And can we get a win in that game? And then finally, we end the season with a game against the New England Patriots in Foxborough. My expectation for that game, regardless, is that they're going to stomp us in Foxborough. Because the Patriots are just, they got brought down to earth a little bit for sure in this Ravens game. But when they play us, especially in Foxborough at the end of the season, yeah, they could probably be resting some guys. There is potential for that. I mean, they're 8-1 right now. They're probably going to be like, I don't know, at least 13-3. And that's probably like, you know, I mean, they're probably going to end up, it's likely they could end up 15-1. So, you know, that Ravens game was probably, their schedule down the back end of the stretch is not very strong. And that Ravens game was like one of the only games that could have prevented them from going undefeated, which thankfully they did. But I expect that we're going to just, even with backups in that game, I'm pretty sure that they'll probably still, you know, win pretty handedly in Foxborough. But we'll see, right? So again, that's what I really want to see for the rest of the season. And then, of course, obviously, I'm going to be monitoring injuries and how that goes. I'm going to be monitoring to see if there are any other guys that step up and whatever, right? Because two of the main bright spots that we've had so far in this season, you know, took pretty big hits, right? So, Preston Williams is obviously out for the remainder of the season with an ACL injury and will miss all the way through what's expected to be training camp of next year. So he probably won't make it back until maybe preseason. And then, you know, we'll have to see how he's doing, how he's coming along. You know, will it be rushing him back? Blah, 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 blah. How does he end up bouncing back from that? Does he get back to form? Does he get back to where he was playing and make progress? There's a lot of mystery that goes into that. And unfortunately, an ACL injury is massive. So we'll see how that plays out. And then Mark Walton, you know, he's suspended for the next 4 games. But we'll see how all that plays out. Again, I was wrong in that I thought the suspension was because of a new substance abuse problem. I was wrong about that. It is related to his off the field issues in the preseason and previously before the season started. So we'll see if the kid can remain out of trouble, and hopefully if he can, then, you know, that won't jeopardize his future with the Dolphins, and then hopefully he can return from this suspension and stay clean, stay free, not have any more in the future, and then obviously miss more game time, and then continue his development. So but for now, we're definitely out those 2 bright spots. So are we going to be able to see anybody else step up in their place? Also, you know, again, for the remainder of the season, because, I mean, look, without question, we're going to have massive turnover on the roster next year. It's just going to be inevitable, right? So, you know, but we do need, if there's going to be any chance for this team at all in any kind of, you know, reasonable time frame, which no matter how you look at it, to me, it's unreasonable to think that we're even going to be competitive, close to competitive, within the next at least 4 years. To me, it's going to take it, and, you know, that's part of the reason why I don't think this regime is going to end up lasting the entire time, because on average, coaching staffs only last 3.5 years under Stephen Ross. I'm pretty sure he's going to end up getting, you know, impatient, and then hit the reset button again. But we'll see how all that plays out. So are there going to be any more like building blocks for this team, right? Like Raekwon McMillan's been doing good things, and Jerome Baker, right? But of course, and Mike Gesicki, but those are Adam Gase picks. So let's give credit there. Now, is this coaching staff helping them to develop? Sure, right? They get credit for this season, right? Brian Flores and the rest of this coaching staff get credit for this season, but Adam Gase gets credit for not only picking those guys, but then starting their development, okay, in the previous years that they were with this team, right? So let's, you know, just to be fair, credit where credit is due in full context. So real quick, let's go ahead and get into the injury report for this upcoming game, and then we'll go ahead and get into the stats and stuff like that. So Final injury report for this upcoming game. Center Daniel Kilgore remains on track to return to the lineup against the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday. So it does look like Kilgore will be back. He has, he's missed the past few games. He's been limited a lot, and he has had a knee brace on because it's a knee injury. But he is, at this point, expected to return. Kilgore has missed the past 3 games with a knee injury, was listed as questionable when the Dolphins released their final injury report of the week. So we'll have to see if he does end up playing or if he ends up being on the inactive list. Kilgore was limited in practice all week. He was listed as doubtful on the final injury report last week against the Jets. So that is an improvement there. We'll see if he ends up, questionable certainly does give him the opportunity to play, just depending on how the coaching staff or whatever decides to handle the inactives. We'll see. So Evan Boehm, who moved over from guard to take Kilgore's place at center in the starting lineup, also was listed as questionable. He was a full participant in practice Friday after being limited the previous 2 days. So our offensive line is getting banged up, though. They've been getting banged up. Our entire team has been getting banged up. But we'll see. Also listed as questionable were defensive tackle Davon Godchaux, who was limited all week with a shoulder injury, who popped up this week on the injury report, which is not good, and defensive end Avery Moss, who has missed the past 3 games because of an ankle injury. Moss also was limited in practice all week. Safety Rashad Jones with a chest and cornerback Ken Webster with an ankle both were ruled out Friday. So those are 2 guys that we already know are going to be part of the 7 inactives, Rashad Jones and Ken Webster, which obviously drastically hurt our defense, although we haven't had Rashad Jones for a while. Xavier Howard's out though now, so now we're going to be down a cornerback, one of our top cornerbacks. They did not bring Cordrea Tankersley back off of PUP, so we don't have him. They brought in some random guys. I mean, they brought in Marcus Sherrills, but he's expected to be mostly a special teams contributor. We'll see how that plays out. But again, I mean, our defense is massively banged up. Our entire team is massively banged up. The other 10 players who appeared on the injury report this week did not receive a game status designation, meaning they'll be available against the Colts, which obviously is good, but they all do have injuries, and we'll see how that goes, plays out going forward, especially with like Ryan Fitzpatrick, who just popped up this week with a shoulder injury. And guess what? It's a right shoulder injury. That's his throwing arm. So that's something that we're going to have to monitor very closely. But that 10 players, so that doesn't even include all the ones that we just listed, which then adds Rashad Jones, Ken Webster, Avery Moss, Davon Godchaux, Boehm, and Kilgore. So that's another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 16 players altogether on the injury report. 10 of them don't have statuses. 2 of them are ruled out. And so those 10 guys, but like Bobby McCain, he's also playing with a separated shoulder, right? So we'll see how that goes. And he's not, we haven't really heard his name much at all, which means he's just playing kind of average. We haven't heard his name in the good light, except he had the one interception that was airmailed to him, packaged and delivered to him by Dak Prescott. But other than that, he hasn't really done anything. But he also hasn't been bad enough to be talked about either. Although this whole team has been bad overall. Whatever. Anyway, those players are safety Walt Aikens, guard tackle Jesse Davis, quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick, wide receiver Jakeem Grant, linebacker Trent Harris, cornerback Chris Lamons, safety Bobby McCain, long snapper Tabor Pepper. So our long snapper now is injured, who just popped up on the injury report. I didn't even know that until just now. Defensive tackle Christian Wilkins, and wide receiver Albert Wilson. So, yeah. That's a fuck ton of guys on across the board. So, we'll see how all that plays out. So the major things to look at for me for the rest of the season are, do we get wins? How competitive are we against individual teams, right? And the quality of opponent, right? We have a couple good teams coming up, and then, some bad teams also down the stretch. Monitor injuries and monitor players that could potentially be, you know, relative building blocks for the future, or potential building blocks for the future, I guess is the more appropriate way to say it. The Colts ruled out 2 players Friday, both of them wide receivers, so T.Y. Hilton with a calf and rookie Paris Campbell with a hand. So those are actually really significant. Obviously, T.Y. Hilton is one of their best you know, threats in the passing game, and Paris Campbell is a rookie who's doing, you know, good things for them. Starting quarterback Jacoby Brissett was listed as questionable with a knee injury. He was limited in practice all week, although we also do know he has been officially ruled out. So they are going to be without Jacoby Brissett, and Brian Hoyer will be taking over quarterback duties. So, you know, there are going to be some opportunities in that way. They are going to be missing some pretty substantial players, mostly on their offense. So let's see how our defense is able to contend with them. You know, specifically in this game, we'll see how we're able to contend with them on the defensive side of the ball for us. And then, you know, obviously we'll have to see how our offense is capable of moving against, you know, a solid defense, who I believe is, you know, ranked somewhere overall in the middle of the pack. Also listed as questionable were cornerback Pierre Desir with a hamstring and cornerback Quincy Wilson with a shoulder. Neither practiced either Thursday or Friday. So there's actually a substantial possibility then that they won't play. But they were listed as questionable, so we'll see. They didn't practice, but maybe that's more precautionary. We'll see what happens with them going forward. But they obviously have far less guys overall that are injured. We have 16, and that does just on the injury report, and that doesn't include guys that are on injured reserve or on PUP. So overall, like half of our team. But again, I said that this was going to happen at the very beginning of the season because, you know, they designed this team to lack in competitive nature, right? Jettisoning out talent and leadership, proven production, blah, 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 all that stuff. And so, you know, that's part of why this whole tanking process is problematic, to say the least, and frankly, as far as I'm concerned, morally reprehensible. Not only because you're forcing these players into a situation in which they are, you know, put on bad film out there and thus could potentially hurt their careers in that way, but you're also putting them in a position where their bodies are on the line and you're getting them hurt for what is clear and obvious intentional losing, to me. Now, again, everybody else can make up their minds on that, you know, as you see fit, as you decide to read the evidence that we have in front of us. But to me, it's pretty clear and obvious that systemically, by design, which almost nobody disagrees with at this point, like even people like Doug, who will say that this team has been systemically designed, and he says it all the time, but then he blames it on the players, which doesn't make any fucking sense. But he says it all the time that this team is young and inexperienced. Yes, that is designed, is made that way because of the coaching staff and the front office. That was intentional. So they deserve either credit or blame depending on how it goes. It's been terrible to this point, worked out terribly to this point. So logically, they get blamed for it, right? I mean, they get credit for the bad, which means they get blame and they should be held accountable and they are responsible for that. The front office and the coaching staff. But then again, there is plenty of evidence on the field of, at the very least, putting it in the best and most fair framing possible, questionable things in both how they've used guys like not shadowing Juju Smith-Schuster with Xavier Howard, for example, or for some reason mysteriously taking one of your best offensive linemen in Shaq Calhoun out of the lineup last week against a bad team. Just starting yourself off handicapped, especially when we're already missing our starting center. You know, our starting right tackle is injured. Why he wasn't injured at all, still isn't on the injury report. Why was Shaq Calhoun inactive, right? So there's that, not to mention the use of timeouts has been atrocious. You could say that their challenges have been at best. And then again, with play calling and on-field decisions, there is overwhelming evidence. The 2-point conversion against the Redskins, right? The 3rd and 20 against the Steelers, blah, blah, blah. Some third and 3 play, the 3rd and 12 play against the Buffalo Bills, right? That I've talked about in previous videos. So, you know, that's how, anyway, that's how I see things going for the rest of the season. And yeah, so there's definitely going to be some opportunities in this game. We'll see how it ends up turning out. Like I said, I'm not really going to be on, you know, for the remainder of the season, I'm probably not going to worry about like specific scores so much. Overall, I think that it's probably likely that we lose this game. I may end up throwing out some numbers at some point. We'll see. Let me get into the statistics though. So, you know, we're massively injured. They're not really. They do have some key players out though. So, you know, we'll see how that turns out in this game. But again, it is a home game for them. They are 5-3 right now. We are 1-7. As per the league standings right now, offensively, points per game, we have 12.9, which is 30th in the league. And we only have 103 on the season, which is terrible. Absolutely terrible. So again, let's see. Do we go above or below our average? Because most of our games, we've been below that average. You know, a couple games with 10 points, a couple games with 6, one with no points, right? So are we going to be above or below that? And I think as of right now, we're obviously not going to go 0-16. There is still potential we could go 1-15, which would super suck. But it looks like we potentially could skate as being the worst team to ever exist in NFL history. But obviously that does, you know, remain to be seen based off of the remainder of the season. So do we play above or below that? If we end up playing above that and get more points and raise our points per game average, I mean, even if we only got 14 points and it raised by just a smidge, we'd still probably be like 30th in the league or whatever. But at least we would play above that and could help potentially avoid then being the worst offensive team to ever exist. But on the other side, Indy is scoring 22.8 per game, which is 17th. Yards per game, we're getting 262.2, which is 30th. They are getting 343.6, which is 21st. Passing yards per game, we have 198.5, which is 29th. They have 213.9, which is 23rd. Rushing yards per game, we only have 63.8, which honestly looks to probably take a step back with Mark Walton being out. Same thing in the passing game with Preston Williams being out. We have 63.8, which is 31st in the league. They have 129.8, which is 9th in the league. Defensively, we're giving up 32 points per game. We've given up 256 on the season, 32nd in the league, of course, which is terrible. And again, do we play above or below that? This is a game where we could end up seeing, you know, a good team. And again, next week with the Bills, we could see, you know, above 30 points. Do we play above or below that average? Now, you know, a good amount of our games have been below that 32 average. Now, part of that is because we gave up 59 points in the first game, 43 in the second game. But again, 5 out of our 8 games, we've given up over 30 points. And in the ones we didn't, we still gave up 27 to the Steelers. We gave up, you know, in the teens to bad teams, right? Like, whatever it was. We gave 17 to the Washington Redskins, and we gave up 18 against the Jets, right? And then, yeah, and then 27 against the Steelers. So, you know, the next 2 games are certainly games where they could end up scoring, you know, 30 points, but maybe not. We'll see. Do we play above and below that? That's the point, right? Indianapolis, though, on the other hand, is giving up 22.1 points per game, which is 17th. Yards allowed, we're giving up 402.4, which is 29th in the league. And then, let's see, they are giving up 339.9, which is 14th. Passing yards allowed, that we're giving up 251.6, which is 20th. Again, that is definitely obviously a major step forward. That's the best stat we have in any category. But Xavier Howard's out for the year. Ken Webster's out of this game. Rashad Jones isn't playing. Bobby McCain's banged up. The rest of our defense is banged up. We'll see. We'll see. Where was I? Indy is giving up 231.2 yards, passing yards per game, which is 15th in the league. Rushing yards, we're still giving up 150.8 per game, which is 31st in the league. They're giving up 108.6, which is 18th. In our previous games, obviously ours against the Jets, theirs against the Steelers, we had 316 total yards. They had 328. But again, juxtapose that. So we played a really bad Jets team. They played a solid and on the rise Steelers team. Now again, there is still potential for, our draft picks to be bad. I mean, even if we went 1-15 the rest of the season, we could potentially end up with the number 1 overall pick. That is possible, especially because that means we would lose to the Jets and the Bengals. But even if we got that, there is still, we expect the Texans to pick to be in the mid-20s because we do expect them to at the very least make it to the playoffs, if not push into the playoffs. Any deeper past the first round. But the Steelers, again, are certainly on the rise, and they have a bunch of winnable games going forward. And so there is also potential that they could potentially squeak in to the playoffs, because this year there is potential that a wild card spot could have a record of like 8-8 or something like that, even potentially 7-9. So if they squeak into the playoffs, that automatically will drop their pick. Right now it's already projected in the high teens, but that could potentially drop it into the early 20s. So then if we have two picks, two of our first round picks that are in the back end of the draft, or the first round or whatever, that obviously hurts our draft status, even if we were able to get the number 1 pick, which obviously means we would have to just lose the rest of our games. But there are winnable games on the schedule against the Jets, for example, or the Bengals. And especially if we were to win against those teams, that pushes them up and gives them tiebreakers over us, which would then push our pick back potentially out of the top 5, which would be honestly probably one of the most catastrophic things that could happen, honestly, realistically, for draft positioning, for sure, but as well for potentially the rebuilding of this team. Now again, for me, I personally don't really care. Again, it's not where you draft, but how you draft. And I would personally rather see the wins. But realistically speaking, factually speaking, it would at the very least hurt our draft positioning. Now, also, the thing is, another major potential of that scenario is if we do end up winning against the Jets and the Bengals, that would put us, 3-13 potentially on the season. But that would most likely drop us out of the top 5 as well. And then there's potential that we would then trade up to go get a quarterback. And there's also potential that with Andy Dalton and, whatever some of the young guys they have now, plus the potential to trade back and still get a top quarterback, is in the cards for the Bengals, right? They wouldn't necessarily have, if they got the number 1 overall pick, they wouldn't have to, like, if our pick was like 5 or 6, right? They could still actually end up getting a top quarterback somewhere in there, right? Or even trade up again a little bit, because there is potential that in a scenario like that, let's say we picked it like 6, right? There is potential that based off of how it would all calculate out, that we could end up trading away maybe like, one of our other first round picks this year and then a first round pick next year, or maybe even both of the other first round picks that we have this year. So there is potential that, like, let's say we picked like 6th, 21st, and 26th. There is potential we could trade all those picks to the Bengals to get the first one. That is not out of the realm of possibility if that situation played out and we did end up winning a couple more games this season and ended up falling out of the top 5, and if, you know, the Steelers pick ends up being, you know, high teens, early 20s, whatever. So we'll see. And then because in that situation, then they would have Andy Dalton, which I think they probably should move on from at this point. But then they would have Andy Dalton, whatever, you know, other quarterbacks they have on the roster. But then think about it. Then they would have the in that particular situation, it would be like, and this is speculation, it wouldn't exactly be this, but like something around like pick 5 to 7, which would be our own pick. And then like, you know, the Steelers pick being like high teens, early 20s, and then the Texans pick being like mid 20s, right? So they would get all that. I mean, that would be, you know, a ton of draft capital to get, and they could potentially do it. And so that is something to keep an eye on as well, right? So there's a lot of ways that this can work out. Unfortunately, that's the thing. And again, part of the reason why I very much disagree with this, because the majority of situations that could potentially play out really are not going to be good for this team in the long haul. You know, most of the situations that could potentially play out are going to be, you know, situations in which this team is going to be, you know, looking at a reset again in a few years. Anyway, but let's get back to it. So where was I? We had, again, 316 total yards. They had 328. We had 266 passing yards. They had 189. We had 50 rushing yards. They had 139. We had 4.9 yards per play. They were at 5. We had no fumbles, but they did have 2. We had no interceptions, and they had 1. But again, that is against the Steelers team, who, especially with now Minkah Fitzpatrick back there playing at free safety, they are, I'm pretty sure, if not leading the league, they are at the top of the league and probably in the top 5 with turnovers. I'm pretty sure that they lead the lead, though, in turnovers, because their defense is crazy, and they're just, you know, snatching the ball all over the place. So keep that in mind. We were 50% on third down. They were 33. But again, it's super important to keep the context. We played a super bad team. They played a good team, and that's definitely on the rise. Let's see. Or at least, at the very least, an average team that's on the rise. Let's see. We had the ball for 31 minutes and 14 seconds. They had it for 30 minutes and 32 seconds. We had 6 accepted penalties, and they had 7. Ryan Fitzpatrick was 24 for 36. With 66.7% completion percentage, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 118.8 passer rating. On the season, he's at 61.1% completion percentage, 1,195 yards, 8 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and an 80.1 passer rating. Now again, best game he's had all season, but again, against a bad team with a lot of problems, both on the roster and within the organization, that was really banged up coming into this game. They got more banged up as the game progressed, lost more guys, including their starting center, which ended up resulting in why we got a safety on them, not because of our defense. And although, to be fair, our defense almost got the touchdown. Taco Charlton almost recovered the ball for a score, but it just popped out of his grasp when he landed on it, and it went out of the end zone, to be fair. But again, that was not on our... Anyway, and they were definitely way more victimized by the terrible officiating than we were, and we had a team of guys who were playing for their pride, playing for their careers and contracts, and so on and so forth, that outplayed a bad team that's banged up, has a lot of problems, blah, 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 blah. Whereas, you know, and so did he play his best game? Absolutely. But, you know, the defense of the Colts is a lot better. So is he going to have a stat line that impressive with a 118.8 passer rating, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, with almost 300 yards and over 65% of his passes completed? Probably not. he's probably gonna, come back down to earth at least a little bit. Maybe like you saw in the last quarter of the Redskins game, or how he played against Buffalo, right? Whatever. Something like that. Maybe just an average stat line. I find it pretty unlikely, especially with who Ryan Fitzpatrick is, and especially considering the fact that he has a throwing shoulder injury. I find it pretty unlikely. So, and we'll have to see. Does Josh Rosen come into this game, right? Especially considering that injury. Who knows? Maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick ends up being one of the inactives tomorrow. We'll see, right? But anyway, Brian Hoyer. So I'm going to give you Brian Hoyer's stats. This is the only time he's played this season. The reason why is because obviously Jacoby Brissett is going to be out. So it doesn't really matter how he's performed up to this point in the season, because we're going to be facing Brian Hoyer. But Brian Hoyer did pretty damn good overall in his first playing time at all this season, and especially against a damn good defense in the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he was 17 for 26, 70% completion percentage, 168 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a 73.3 passer rating. I don't know, wait, I'm sorry, that's not right. With a 105.9 passer rating, excuse me. That was a statistic that I didn't change in my template here when I was going through this. Because on the season, and also, I'm sorry, his completion percentage is not right either. It's 65.4% completion percentage for the season. Or in that game. Because on the season, and again, this is the only time he's played so far this year because it's been Jacoby Brissett. So he's 65.4% completion percentage on the year with 168 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a 105.9 passer rating. Obviously all came from this game. Let's see. In the rushing game, Mark Walton led the way for us. 10 rushes for 29 yards and a 2.4 average. Obviously, he's going to be out this upcoming game. Kalen Ballage contributed, though, 7 rushes for 19 yards and a 2.7 average. He's expected to be the leading back going into this game. We do also have Patrick Laird, Myles Gaskin, DeLance Turner, and somebody else. Oh, no, I think that's it. I think it's just those 4 guys. So we'll see what happens with that, right? Marlon Mack led the way for them. 21 carries, 89 yards, and a 4.2 average. And Paris Campbell had 3 rushes for 27 yards and a 9 average. But obviously, he is going to be out of that game. He's a wide receiver, though, so he, he got like a jet sweep or whatever it was kind of play. But anyway, so he's not going to be in that game. But Marlon Mack is a good rusher, and our defense is giving up over 150 yards per game. So we'll see how that goes. Mike Gesicki led the way for us, 6 of 6 for 95 yards. Preston Williams was 5 of 9 for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, he's going to be out in that game. Devontae Parker was 4 of 6. And for the rest of the season, Devontae Parker was 4 of 6 for 57 yards and a score. Jakeem Grant, 3 of 5 for 33 yards. Allen Hurns, 2 of 3 for 16 yards. And Mark Walton, 3 of 4 for 12. Obviously, again, going to be out. Zach Pascal was 5 of 6 for them for 76 yards and a score. Paris Campbell, 5 of 5 for 53 yards. Obviously, he's going to be out. Jack Doyle was 3 of 4 for 22 yards and a score. Chester Rogers, 3 of 5 for 22 yards and a score. Nyheim Hines, 1 of 3 for 21 yards. Eric Ebron, 2 of 2, 16. And Mo Ali Cox was 1 of 1 for 11. So they still do have some they don't really have any superstars on that team, especially with T.Y. Hilton being out, Jacoby Brissett's out, Paris Campbell, their rookie who's been doing good things for them, is out. But they do have still some productive guys. Eric Ebron's a good tight end. Marlon Mack's a good running back. So their offense is not superstar, blah, 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 but they do have a lot of opportunities, certainly against, a Dolphins defense who overall has been, struggling pretty immensely and who is massively banged up. So we'll see. Again, have they played far better in the past 4 games? Statistically speaking, yes. But again, overall, 2 of those teams are still very bad, the Jets and the Redskins. The Steelers were bad at the time, but are certainly more on the rise and only about average currently as far as standings go and, you know, win-loss record. And the Bills were the only team certainly at the time and who remain an above 500 team who is a good team, right? So, because they are now 6-2 on the season, I believe. So, yeah. Anyway, and then defensively, in our previous game, we did have 3 sacks and 5 tackles for loss with an interception and 2 passes defensed. Again, though, that interception was airmailed to us right to Jamal Wiltz in like double, triple coverage against, you know, Sam Darnold. Bad decision on him. He was getting pursued. He should have just taken the sack, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, they have a terrible offensive line. Their fucking center got hurt in this game, blah, blah, blah. So, and the Colts, their offensive line is a lot better. So we'll see how all that plays out. Again, and our defense is massively banged up across the board. Our defensive line, Christian Wilkins and Devon Godshaw, guys who just recently popped up on the injury report. Xavier Howard's out for the season. Ken Webster's out this game. Rashad Jones is out. Bobby McCain's really hurt. Or is you know, hurt. Right? So we'll see. The Colts, though, in their previous game against the Steelers, had 1 sack, 5 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, an interception, and 2 passes defensed. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, overall, I mean, clearly across the board, league standings-wise, statistically speaking, record-wise, they're obviously the better team. Now, we'll see how this goes, right? Again, the key things for me, just simply for the rest of the season is, do we manage to win any games? How competitive are we against the individual teams and the quality of opponent that they are? And, you know, continue to monitor injuries and potential players who could be maybe possibly building blocks for the future. I do expect that we'll end up losing this game. Again, it's in Indy. They are a good team. They're 5-3. They do have some key guys out. There are going to be opportunities. It could end up being a close game. It could end up being, you know, whatever. See, I mean, that's the thing, is that, and that's part of the reason why, and especially with the state of this team right now, the Dolphins, and the injuries and everything, there's just so much. There's too much. So I'm not really going to harp on score predictions. I think that we'll probably, in the grand scheme of things, with all the information that I have, I think that it's likely that we'll end up winning this game, but there is potential that we could keep it close, and there is certainly potential for an upset, although I find that to be pretty unlikely. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. Again, I'm not really going to do a score prediction. There's just more generalized things that I'm looking for. Yeah, so that's that, guys. I'm going to go ahead and get up out of here. That's my preview for this upcoming game. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts for my videos. Make sure you share my channel and my videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And, of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.